One of the cool things about the Pecha stage, or Pecha Kucha, is sometimes somebody brings something up that makes you think a little bit differently or more or whatever. Or maybe we might bring up, excuse me, something that might interest me a little bit. Our next gentleman, Ken Valkenburg. Vulcan. Never mind. So, everybody's never heard that. It just occurred to me. He's talking about researching cancer, I believe. Sometimes that can be different from their emails, but something that really ties very closely to my world. And so, everyone, listen to Ken.
So a quick disclaimer, I suppose, before we get started. I put a lot of information in here, so just bear with me, and hopefully you can kind of keep up with my thoughts here. So go ahead. So science is a word that elicits a lot of responses from people. You could remember back to your high school chemistry class where you're sitting bored looking at equations like these on the board and thinking that, screw this, science sucks. You could think about space. You could think about crystal meth, like Mr. White over here is cooking. You could think about mad scientists trying to bring people or monsters back from life, or back to life from the dead. But when I think about science, I think about something totally different. I think about something called biomedical research or translational research. And basically this is a long 20 seconds, but basically translational research or bench-to-bedside research, is another way to think about it, is taking scientific discoveries that you make in the bench or in the lab, turning them into drugs to treat people with cancer or a myriad of other diseases. And I'm going to focus on cancer because that's what I do over at the Van Andel Institute downtown. So basically, cancer affects the United States in a very terrible way. So this is how many people are going to die pretty much every year in the United States from cancer. It's a lot of people. These are the types of cancers that are affecting people. And there's probably about 13 million people right now alive in the United States with cancer, so it's a very serious disease, and it needs a lot of research. So the drug discovery aspect of translational research is very frustrating, very time-consuming and expensive. It takes about 15 years and about $1 billion to take a drug from a lab discovery into the clinic to treat patients. And about every 10,000 potential drugs, you get about one from that. So it takes a very long time and it's very expensive. And in the research side of it, biomedical research can be kind of split into two things, basic or translational research. And I've already told you about translational. It's basically trying to push drugs into the clinic to treat. Basic research is basically just trying to figure out what is going on in the world around you in biology, physics, chemistry, whatever it is, using model organisms and trying to figure out what's going on in their DNA or at the protein level, whatever it is. So this is an example of actually translational research. In leukemia, there's this thing called the Philadelphia chromosome, discovered in Philadelphia, by these scientists in 1960 who were basically just looking at leukemia cells, and they saw this chromosomal translocation. About 40 years later, it finally became a drug, a kinase inhibitor called Gleevec, that cures about 95% of the people with that disease. Another example of basic research that kind of is turning into translational is a pathway, a protein called Wnt that was discovered about 30 years ago in mice and flies. And then since then, a lot of other pathway members have been discovered, and now there's a drug called LGK974, which is in clinical trials for metastatic cancer, and that's one of the drugs that I'm actually working on in the lab right now. So kind of a day in the life of what a scientist does, I wanted to kind of share with you. There's a lot of reading, a lot of just kind of thinking about things, what other people have discovered, the way things work, trying to figure out what hypotheses you have about the way things are working, and then trying to get money to actually conduct the experiments, which can be frustrating. And then most of our time is actually spent performing these experiments, so carrying them out in the lab. This is some of the data that actually I've generated. And then usually you get this data, you observe, you analyze, and then you generate more hypotheses, and it kind of goes in a cycle for a bit until you find something that you can conclude something about. And once you do that, you report these findings, both in scientific journals, so other people can read what you've done, and then also in scientific meetings, so you can tell other people face-to-face, this is what I've been doing, what have you been doing, things like that. Once you do all that, you can use that data that you've generated to try to get funding for your next set of experiments and start this whole process over again. So where does funding for biomedical research come from? Mostly the government, so the NIH, the DoD, and the NSF provide most of the funding for research in America. There's some private foundations that you see in the middle row here that do that as well. And then there's philanthropic people, so billionaires that start cancer research institutes such as the Van Andel. Then there's crazy people who shave their heads and try to get cancer funding raised as well. So let's look a little bit more into the government funding aspect of it. This is the budget of the United States government. It's about $3.8 trillion, and it's been the same for a while now. But right here is the National Cancer Institute budget, which is $5 billion. That's to fund all of the cancer research in America, and it's much less than the defense budget, if you saw that little graph there as well. So this is a survey of scientists from this year. About 80% of them say that they're spending more time trying to get funding. 67% of them say they're getting actually less funding, and about 2% of them say that the funding that they're not getting is actually being provided by the institutions, the universities that they're working at. So funding is a very real problem right now in this research. This is an interesting graph. The national debt is huge, and the blue bars are what projections of what the national debt will be up to about 2021. The red bar is what they will be with the sequester, which you've all heard about. And the sequester cuts scientific funding by several $billion, and I'm just here to say that's not going to work, and it's not going to help with the national debt. So this is really the goal of biomedical research, which is personalized medicine, which is on the left here, we're giving kind of a one-size-fits-all therapy to everybody, hoping that you get a positive effect. But where we're going is we're going to sequence people's genomes, trying to figure out what exact specific disease they have, and then provide them with a specific drug that can help their needs. And basically what we're doing here is we're sequencing the genome so we can figure out in the DNA what kind of mutations or issues are there, so we can figure out what's wrong with your RNA, your protein, that affects the cell, which affects Arnold Schwarzenegger, or your body, the organism. So the reason that genomic sequencing is happening so fast is because the technology has advanced at incredible rates, so faster than anyone has really predicted. And the cost of sequencing a genome, a human genome, has gone from about $1 billion in 10 years for the first human genome, if you've heard about that project, to about a day and about $1,000. So it's incredible. So what we have to figure out now, though, is not can we sequence our genome, because we can very easily, but how do we get this, because this is what the sequence of a genome looks like, into making actual decisions for human health. The way this is going to happen is a lot of things have to happen for that to happen, basically. And so education has to improve vastly. Funding also has to increase by a large margin. Education for MDs, medical doctors, needs to go up so they can actually interpret what they're seeing. Integration of the sciences, so biology, chemistry, all of those things have to kind of work together, and scientists need to discuss and communicate. And then insurance companies and the government need to understand genomic diseases and disorders and how they can fund those, and the government just needs to understand science, period. And then science would be nothing without the people, and these are some of the people that I know. So a lot of grad students at Van Andel up here, and then my lab mates. So again, science is nothing without the people who are curious enough to stick with it and drive it. So that's pretty much all I have.
Ken, thank you very much. Thank you for the work that you do, and also for making me smarter for the next dinner party I go to.